everyone, welcome to another moon video. We're still a week or so away from the new moon, so today my intention is simply to share with you why I'm making these videos, why I'm talking about the moon, why she's important in our lives, and how you can utilize these archetypes in the way that I have to go deeper and connect not only with ourselves in all aspects, but also with the moon and her cycles, the larger cycles of this world. The moon, I believe, has a special connection with us, specifically as humans. The moon, of course, controls water, controls the tides, and us being 70% water, her phases and her cycles have a huge impact on who we are, what we're feeling at the time, what we might be focusing on or feel called to do in a certain moment. Humans in particular, I feel, have a special connection with the moon because for biological women, our menstrual cycle is the same length as a moon cycle, and that's not all that common within the animal kingdom. A lot of smaller animals, they'll have a cycle of just a few days. Larger livestock typically a lot of them will have a cycle of 21 days. So to have a 28-day cycle, or 29, which is the moon, is pretty unique, and a lot of women, I think, will find that we'll either ovulate or menstruate starting with the new or the full moon. So these cycles of the moon are incredibly important, not only to us being beings on this earth, but us being human in particular. The moon has a lot to offer us in this way. So the moon in astrology, she represents our deep emotional selves, our deep emotional body. She governs our subconscious and our intuition. And in traditional Western astrology, she also represents a connection to our family histories, to perhaps even karmic lessons, to family wounds that generationally we inherit as our own, and then in becoming aware of them, we have the opportunity to break the cycles to heal these family wounds. We can also call upon the moon and call upon her light to bring awareness, to bring light to the truths that we need about these cycles that we see repeating in our lives. Maybe we notice ourselves playing out certain cycles or certain repeating patterns, and if we want to change them, we can use the moon to help us bring understanding and break these cycles that we might feel stuck in, or simply that we want to evolve to a higher level, higher way of being. So the moon really offers us this incredibly unique and important doorway in, this sort of window into which we can fully see and truly see these deeper emotional, intuitive, and healing aspects of ourselves that are incredibly important for not only the important self-work that we're doing, but the self-healing and reconnecting with ourselves, but also the larger cycles of this earth that I think we often get disconnected from, living in a more structured lifestyle of a weekend and a weekday, and staying inside in buildings all day and not spending as much time as we used to outside and inundated within the cycles of nature. So realigning ourselves to the moon can help us start to shift that, start to bring ourselves back not only to ourselves, but to the larger patterns of this world, and help us feel more deeply connected and deeply centered and come back into balance within ourselves. So I want to talk about the cycles of the moon and how I've been talking about them, but also how they occur and how we can use them in different ways. The moon herself, she switches signs every 2 days. So we just had a full moon in Capricorn. About 2.5 days later, she moves into Aquarius. And then another 2.5 days, she'll move into Pisces. And I believe she just entered Aries right now. So with that cycle of every 2.5 days, she'll pass through all of the signs before she comes back around to the next cycle. And of course, at the new moon, she and the sun are conjunct, so they're in the same sign at the same degree. In the traditional Western astrology, we've broken down the moon cycle into 8 phases. So you have, starting with the new moon, you go into the waxing crescent with a little sliver of light appearing. The next phase is called the first quarter phase, or sometimes the second quarter phase, in which you can see half of the moon. So half the moon is illuminated in light, the other half is still in darkness. From there, she grows bigger and bigger, called the waxing gibbous, until finally she is full. At that point, she is directly opposite from the sun, so the sun is illuminating her entire form. During this phase, you can see the moon kind of appear on the horizon before dusk, so before the sun completely falls, and that's typically how if I'm out of sync with what the moon's doing, that's typically how I can figure out if we're in a waxing or a waning moon. Then as the moon moves from full back to new, we have the waning period. So you would see the moon in the morning for a moment after the sun rises. First we have the waning gibbous, otherwise called the disseminating moon, in which she is moving from full to a little bit less round. We have the third quarter phase, in which she's half illuminated, half in darkness, and then final balsamic moon it's called, which is the final little sliver of light before she's completely new and completely surrounded by darkness. We can use these cycles to set intentions and make plans. So typically during the waxing phase, we are starting with the setting of intentions during the new moon, as it's termed, planting the seeds. With the waxing crescent, we are allowing those seeds to sort of take root. We're doing a lot of planning, a lot of sort of scheduling, a lot of setting specific tasks to achieve our intentions. With the first quarter moon, this is really a time for action. So we are taking those action steps from those plans and those intentions that we set. With the waxing gibbous, we are taking a moment to sort of reflect on these steps that we've taken and see if our intentions have shifted form at all, or if we want to sort of open them up or maybe move them in a different direction, sort of readjust our intentions. Then with the full moon, it's not quite the harvest time, it's more like the flowering, in which we see how our intentions and our actions have come to light, have manifested. And it's in this phase, before we reach that harvest phase, that we can kind of prune away or release anything that might keep us from that full completion of this cycle. The waning gibbous, when the moon starts to have that little bit of darkness again, this is when we see the full completion, the full harvest of our efforts. So it's a time of receiving, it's a time of giving thanks, and it's a time of sharing. And then as the moon becomes half in dark again, it's the time to really sort of actively break down anything else that we need to remove in order to start this next cycle. So we're removing all obstacles and barriers, but also just breaking down the elements of the cycle that we just went through so that we can begin the next. And then with the waning gibbous, or the balsamic moon, we take a time to rest and reflect and really restore and nourish ourselves so that we can be fully ready to embark upon the next phase of the moon, the next cycle of the moon. So this is the phase where we would turn all of the elements, all of the things that we learned, all of the pieces of how we manifested in the last cycle into the fuel that brings us through the next cycle. Of course, with my sharings, with my moon videos, I'm talking about the moon in terms of a yearly cycle. So instead of the monthly cycle with the kind of 2 weeks between the new and the full, I'm talking about a yearly cycle with 6 months between the new and the full. In this way, we're talking about the moon as it occurs new and full within the same sign. So for example, I just talked about the Capricorn full moon. Of course, the new moon in Capricorn was 6 months ago. I believe it was in the first week or so of the new year. So this full moon marks the halfway point of this Capricorn cycle. The next new moon this winter will be the ending of that Capricorn cycle. So when I talk about the moons in the 6 month cycle, we're expanding this timeline by quite a lot. And instead of making specific intentions, specific plans for bringing things into our lives, we're more looking at the larger cycles of the archetypes, of how these signs play out in our lives, our relationship to these signs. And in this way, we can more easily track those patterns, those repeating cycles, or align ourselves to these cycles of growth and evolution that we are going through. So when we explore these different archetypes, really we're exploring our relationship to them, how we feel when we talk about or think about embodying or playing out these archetypes in our lives. So for me, this is really where the depth occurs, where I can go deep within myself and really see these sort of channels through which I can not only explore deeply who I am in this stage of growth and this evolution and healing, but where I want to go with all of this too. What I want to bring into my life, how I want to embody this archetype, and how I can heal around its specific themes. Some archetypes feel more comfortable than others. Being a Sagittarius sun, that archetype feels very comfortable. But then with our moon signs, with them representing our family histories, traumas, hurts, they can often be the source of an archetype that needs a lot of healing, that needs a lot of attention and awareness, and can also lead us down that path in which we find the deepest healing. Our moon signs typically represent how we want to be seen in the world, how we want to be held, how we want to be appreciated and recognized, and also typically represent the ways in which we maybe didn't receive that, especially as children, especially growing up, especially within our family histories. So by paying attention to these moons when they're new and when they're full and then new again, we can start to see these patterns play out. We can start to become aware of these stories. Astrology for me isn't a firm foundational belief, rather it's a tool that I use to go within. So by familiarizing myself and by going deep within these archetypes every month, I can start to feel which ones maybe feel more uncomfortable. I can notice where maybe I'm playing out more of the shadow aspects than light aspects of a certain sign. I can see which ones might feel totally foreign to me, ones that I haven't even explored yet in my life. And by noticing where I might feel fear or guilt or shame or discomfort, aversion to something in particular, I can start to notice where there's an unmet need or a deeper fear or a sense of lack that wants attention that I can bring to the forefront so that I continue to grow and evolve and change and challenge myself as I move forward. So in this way, we can use the moon and the archetypes as she goes through these really much larger cycles to evolve and change in a positive way. And then going beyond the astrological level to the personal level, to really deeply become in tune with these cycles, we have to be willing to be open and vulnerable and incredibly honest with ourselves. We don't need to share this with anybody else. We don't need to admit to anybody else the shame or the guilt that we have, or the fear, the embarrassment we might hold over it. We just need to be honest with ourselves, because being honest with ourselves in a way that we're also kind to ourselves when we admit those things that maybe feel shameful or guilty, this is the first step to truly acknowledging what's going on within us and being able to hold ourselves with compassion, which is the necessary first step to making the important change in our lives. It can be really scary. It can be really scary. It can take a lot of courage, but it can also be incredibly interesting and fun and rewarding, especially when we're not simply focusing on these things that we want to change about ourselves, these things that we judge about ourselves, but also the things that we're really proud of. Because maybe some of these archetypes you hear and you feel, oh man, I'm just living from the shadow aspects, or I don't feel comfortable at all with it. But then other archetypes you'll hear and it'll really resonate with you. It'll really align with how you're already living. And these are the things to really celebrate about ourselves as well. We all have these archetypes somewhere in our charts astrologically, but I think also somewhere in our beings. And we can use our knowledge of astrology to make these moons more specific to us. So for example, we can use the house system If you've looked at your astrology chart, if you haven't, you can get them free online. When you look at your astrology chart, they're split up into pieces of a pie, like slices of a pie. These are each of the houses, and where the moon falls in that specific degree will dictate which house it falls in. And these houses represent different aspects, different parts of ourselves. So we can use these houses to be more specific about where in our lives we're being asked to look at these archetypes and where we are being asked to grow. The sign, the archetype, is the how, and the house is the where. It's a little too much to go into all of the houses in particular in this video, but getting in touch with our houses is a really good way to personalize the moon for us. That being said, we don't need to know them. I want to design these videos so that they are broad and open enough that we can apply them to ourselves at any point in our lives. And we don't need the houses to tell us exactly how to focus that energy. We can rely on our intuition and our knowing to both explore and to understand where it is that we're being asked to look at this energy in our lives, in our deeper inner selves. So in this way, I'm sharing with you the way that I use the moon for myself. I love looking at her in these 6-month cycles, but also in these cycles within myself. A really big cycle that I have looked at the past few years, and especially last year, really came to light sort of right with the moon cycles, is the moon falling in Aries for me. Aries is my 7th house of relationships, but Aries, I talked about in the first video, is very much our sense of our sense of wholeness within ourselves, who we are, and how we can lead from a strength of inner knowing, a strength of who we are, an inner strength of being. And for me, I struggled with these patterns of relationships in which I would be sidelined, in which I would give over a lot of my self-worth or identity to a relationship, to being loved, to receiving that attention and that desire and that attraction. And by looking at these cycles of the moon, I was able to, over time, become aware of how the more I led from a sense of self in a committed partnership or a relationship, the more I stay integrated and stay within the integrity of who I am and lead from that, the more my relationships kind of came together in a healthy way, the more I was able to maintain my sense of self and really form those deeper bonds from that. Obviously, this is all a process and I am not perfect. There's always deeper levels and deeper layers to go with this healing. But that is one major layer I was able to sort of unpeel and work through and move out of, evolve from, with the help of using these moon cycles. So I hope this has been informative and helpful. I hope it's inspired you to look at the moon and to appreciate these archetypes within yourself. And I hope that my videos explaining these archetypes and how we can use them to go deeper are helpful to you, are empowering along this journey. If you listen to me talking and you recognize that maybe you're more comfortable or familiar with the shadow aspects rather than the light aspects of these archetypes, I hope that it doesn't bring up a sense of failure or shame or guilt, because that's not the intention. We are all here to hold ourselves in love no matter who we are, and I'll talk about that more with the Cancer new moon in a week or so. But the intention is not to judge ourselves, not to feel shame or guilt, but to simply hold ourselves with understanding and with belonging, and know that through this process of being kind and compassionate towards ourselves, we can make those changes that we want to bring into our lives. We can maybe end these patterns that we've noticed that we don't want to have continue, and we can move into a more higher potential of a more healthy version of who we are. So thank you again for joining me for one of my moon videos. I hope to not only continue to make them with every new and full moon, but to share more, to go deeper into this whole process, not of specifically the moon, but of what the moon represents, going deeper within ourselves, understanding who we are emotionally, connecting to our intuition, and bringing about that deep transformational healing. So thank you for being here. Thank you for allowing me to hold this space for us. I hope you have a beautiful week, and I will see you soon.